Oh, this sounds like rather a familiar story and one that's being repeated right now. Hmm. So presumably the Bank of England was all part of this picture.
Yes, it was. As we've seen, the East India Company was being run from Geneva by shareholders, and eventually a few Freemasons in Britain joined that particular club, but in fact it was Lombard in every way. And the Bank of England, we might say, was founded directly from the Fondo of Venice via Holland, and it was not a good bank when it began its life. Paper currency was brought to us, and with that came the usual inflation, war, which it was prepared to pay for, and the debts that resulted from that. The bank was first under the Venetian Charles Montague, and along with the foundation of the Bank of England came the Bank of Amsterdam, Hamburg, and Sweden. But of course, all of these banks were basically the result of the Fondo of Venice. In 1773, the Bank of England foreign shareholders helped to cause the War of Independence, attacking the finances of America. So we know what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the same old central banking structure of Italy. 7 men formed the bank and insisted on having paper money, headed by somebody called William Paterson. And as I said just earlier, the Treasury debts rose from 1.25 million into about 16 million in a very short period of time. These bankers had the right to form the Bank of England, and they allowed 10 paper pounds for every pound value metal. So you've got this system of inflation and creep right from the start. And they allowed the taxpayer really to recover all the loans that they made. So there's a very familiar kind of ring going on about what subsequently happened in America and then in Europe. They made a 50% profit on loans of only 5%, so you can see a rampant system being developed which caused our nation dear. In 1771, the foreign shareholders, as I said, influenced the behaviour of the bank, so you've got the bank beginning to interfere in people's countries and causing wars. Now, what we have to say over a period of time is that it was the establishment in Britain, all of it, virtually all of it, that was infected by this invasion. And so when the clear-up came, Britain had a new nation. And although from outside, looking in on Britain, you like to say that over this period of time, that Britain itself was the cause and the corruption. In fact, all of this came from outside the nation. So as we began to reform our nation, down to things like slavery and opium dealing and all the other things that happened through the East India, so the bank was reformed, and one often hears today that the Bank of England is corrupt, but what one can really say is you have to look back at what happened, and you see that the majority of those conditions vanished away over time. So we had a Bank of England that was then held in to the British government, and that was a measure of control over the bank that was very, very necessary and took it away from private shareholders.
There are a lot of campaigners who think that the Bank of England should be abolished. Now, what are your views on this?
Well, my personal view is that the Bank of England is serving our nation extremely well, and were it not for the Bank of England and its activities, we could be and would be in a very, very serious financial position today. So I think with all of the British establishment, which must include the Bank of England, one has to look very, very carefully at something which does serve the nation extremely well, which has changed its nature, and try to be objective about what one finds there. I know there's controversy because people would, for instance, would like to know who the shareholders are, and that information has never been given out. Now, things like that people would like to know about their own bank. But that said, it was a very, very corrupt bank when it was formed, and is now, I think, doing rather a good job for the nation.
Well, maybe the shareholders are actually the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers.
Well, I think you make a point, and we simply don't know. And what I've said is I think we really ought to know who the shareholders are in the Bank of England. And I also think that the reforms which have taken the Bank of England a little bit away from the government and made it more independent are a grievous mistake.
in a book titled None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen and Larry Abraham on page 45. The question is asked, where do governments get the enormous amounts of money that they need? Most, of course, comes from taxation. But governments often spend more than they are willing to tax from their citizens, so governments are forced to borrow.